with our webinar. Thank you again for attending. Very much appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be here with us. We are really excited about today's webinar, which will be about getting your Portuguese citizenship. I know a lot of us have had the question on our minds, is it possible, what's the process? And many of us may even have the impression that it takes a long time and is very difficult. And so we're really thrilled to have here today Lisette and Marcy with Portugal Reconnect, who can walk us through the process and give us some tips for do's and don'ts. This is a little bit about our two presenters, Lisette Esteves and Marcy Pereira. They are co-founders of Portugal Reconnect, which is the service that helps people get their Portuguese citizenship. They're both attorneys admitted to the Portuguese bar, so they absolutely can help process the paperwork, translate the paperwork, and get everything registered in Portugal, which, you know, in my personal experience has been the biggest challenge, I think, in going through the process. So today everybody is in listen-only mode so that we can avoid any background noise. If you do have a question, you should have a GoToWebinar console on the right-hand side of your screen. You can submit your questions there, and I'll read them out to Lisette and Marcy. If you have additional questions after the webinar, you can email them to palcus@palcus.org, and we will get them to Lisette and Marcy, or if we can answer them ourselves, we will do that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over controls to Lisette. And Lisette, take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, thank you, Angela and Palcus, for providing us with a platform to host this webinar and for all of your support thus far. Thank you to everyone who is attending and live with us right now. Today's presentation is going to begin with an overview of some of the most common situations that will allow for someone to claim their Portuguese citizenship. Angela, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time controlling the slides here.
Give it another try with the space bar, perhaps.
Okay.
It worked during the rehearsal.
It did.
It shows that you have control. There you go. It should work now. You see your mouse. The beauties of live presentations. Perhaps yes. Try the arrows. Maybe the arrows would work on your keyboard.
No. So, Angela, do you just want to go ahead and put us on to the first slide?
Sure. Sorry about that.
Okay. So let's talk briefly about who is eligible for citizenship. If you're the child of a Portuguese citizen, then yes, you are eligible. And this is the only situation that definitely confers citizenship. If you are married to a Portuguese citizen, if you're the grandchild of a Portuguese citizen, if you've been adopted by a Portuguese citizen, or if you fall into one of these special cases that we will speak about further on in this presentation, then you may have a claim for citizenship. And then we see if you are the great-grandchild of a Portuguese citizen, you no longer have a claim to citizenship. Okay, let's talk about children. Children born abroad to Portuguese parents, either one or both, are entitled to Portuguese nationality, as long as they declare their wish to become Portuguese. All the child needs to do is to declare that he or she wishes to be Portuguese and then register his or her birth with the Portuguese Civil Registry Office. The child must follow the procedure for attribution of citizenship through declaration and therefore declare his or her wish to become Portuguese, and they can do this at any moment of their lives. If the child is underage, only parents can apply for Portuguese citizenship. But on the other hand, if the child is over the age of 18, then only he or she can apply for their own Portuguese citizenship. The applicant must instruct their application with proof of Portuguese citizenship of their parents, and in this case, that would be the Portuguese birth certificate. For any child of a Portuguese citizen, even if they do not have any interest in Portugal or in Europe right now, it is important to obtain citizenship, because if they don't, then it becomes that much harder for their children and grandchildren to obtain citizenship for themselves. It's also important to note that children of Portuguese citizens, while they're still minors, are exempt from any filing fees. We'll go on to talk about our next situation of citizenship, which is acquiring citizenship through marriage. And in this case, a foreigner who has been married for more than 3 years to a Portuguese national can acquire citizenship by formal declaration. To be entitled to Portuguese nationality, there have been additional requirements besides the duration of the marriage. The person must possess knowledge and a good understanding of the Portuguese language and express an effective connection to the Portuguese community. Additionally, the applicant cannot have been found guilty of a crime whose penalty corresponds to a 3-year or more prison sentence under the laws of Portugal. However, acquisition of citizenship by marriage is not automatic, but it is a right for those who fulfill the legal requirements. This means that the state can prevent the acquisition of nationality by taking a procedure of opposition through the public prosecutor. And Angela, if you would just go over to the next slide, please. This procedure aims to prevent persons without any connection to Portugal from acquiring Portuguese nationality. This means that we can have 2 scenarios for acquisition through marriage. One, where there is no opposition by the public prosecutor, or if a court states that opposition to the application is unfounded. Opposition should only take place when there are indications that the following grounds may exist: the non-existence of an effective connection to the national community, a conviction for committing a crime which carries a prison sentence of 3 or more years under Portuguese law, or the performance of public duties with a predominantly non-technical character or non-compulsory military service for another country. Opposition to the acquisition of Portuguese citizenship is a special legal procedure which may be initiated by the public prosecutor within 1 year of the date on which the application was filed. Once a year has lapsed without opposition from the public prosecutor, the right to opposition expires and acquisition becomes definite. From our experience in almost all the cases of application for citizenship by marriage, the public prosecutor has presented opposition based on the grounds of the lack of an effective connection with the Portuguese community. However, it should be noted that this conduct is not in line with the reform that the Portuguese Nationality Act underwent in 2006. Marcy will now be guiding us through some of the other situations that may confer Portuguese nationality. Marcy?
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Lisette. Well, now we are going to talk about the possibility of acquiring Portuguese citizenship by being a grandchild to a Portuguese citizen. So in this case, the Portuguese National Act establishes that the grandchildren with at least 1 Portuguese grandparent can apply for the Portuguese citizenship through naturalization without the need of living in Portugal, as long as his or her Portuguese grandparent has not lost the citizenship. But unlike the situation that Lisette spoke about children of Portuguese citizens, where having Portuguese parents is enough to justify their application, the grandchildren must meet further requirements besides having a Portuguese grandparent. And these requirements are: they have to have enough knowledge of the Portuguese language. They need to be over 18 years old, which means that underage children or grandchildren cannot apply for naturalization, not even represented by their parents, and they cannot have been found guilty of a crime which penalty in Portugal is of imprisonment of 3 or more years. Now, this procedure is only advised in the situation in which the parent of the grandchild, who is the child of the Portuguese citizen has passed away before obtaining the Portuguese citizenship for himself. So from our experience, when you have a grandchild, when you have a grandparent that is Portuguese The correct way to obtain citizenship is first the parent to acquire Portuguese citizenship, and then the grandchild to obtain Portuguese citizenship by the parents. So we should only use acquisition of Portuguese nationality in second degree when one of the parents has already died. Now we are going to also talk about some special cases where we can acquire Portuguese citizenship. So one of the special cases that is very recent, it's from October of 2013, where there was an amendment to the Nationality Act, is the case of the naturalization of descendants of 16th century Jews. So this recent amendment to the Portuguese Nationality Act allows the descendants of Jews who were expelled in the 16th century to become citizens if they belong to a Sephardic community of Portuguese origin with ties to Portugal. So in this case, the applicants must be able to show Sephardic names. And another factor is the language spoken at home. So we would have to do the proof of the Sephardic name, of the history, and the language that is spoken at home. This amendment, however, says that the descendants of the Sephardic Jew community do not need to reside in Portugal. So if this is your case, you don't have to be worried about living in Portugal. It can be possible to get naturalization for these people. Another situation is the acquisition of Portuguese nationality through connections with former territories of Portugal, with the ex-colonies. So Portuguese nationality can also be acquired as a result of a connection with a former Portuguese colony. Those who were born in these territories may claim for Portuguese nationality. However, the eligibility and requirements must be examined on a case-by-case basis because the requirements are so different from case to case, from people that were from Angola or then people that were from, for example, Goa. So we would have to examine case by case. And another common situation that we encounter has to do with the loss and the reacquisition of Portuguese nationality. So there are many people that, when emigrated, had lost their Portuguese nationality. So those who have lost Portuguese citizenship as a result of renouncing it may reacquire it by declaration. There are also situations where the women who married foreigners would lose also their Portuguese citizenship. So they also can now make a declaration where they say that they would want to reacquire their citizenship, and this is not subject to opposition of the public prosecutor. And this reacquisition has effect from the date that they have lost their citizenship. So it acts retroactively. And the Nationality Act also allows the reacquisition of Portuguese citizenship by all of those who have lost it when they acquired another citizenship. The reacquisition of citizenship in these cases also are not subject to opposition by the public prosecutor, and it becomes effective from the date of acquisition of the foreign citizenship. So in a case where a person went to the U.S. and acquired the U.S. citizenship and lost the Portuguese citizenship because of acquiring the American citizenship, can now ask for the reacquisition of Portuguese citizenship, and the effect will retroactively go to the date when they acquired also their American citizenship. So this is good because it will allow for the children that were born after the loss of the acquisition of the Portuguese citizenship to acquire citizenship by their parents. Please keep a note that it's not because you acquired a new citizenship that means that you have lost Portuguese citizenship. So there has to be registered definite loss of citizenship. So from case to case, some people think that because they got the American citizenship that they lost their Portuguese citizenship, but many times that is not the case. So we would have to look to the birth certificate and see if there is registered the loss of the Portuguese citizenship. Now, many times people talk about a dual citizenship. So in terms of dual citizenship, Portugal has never signed any international convention which prevents the dual citizenship. So you can access to Portuguese citizenship and never be subject to the loss of any foreign citizenship that a person might hold, which means that the two citizenships may coexist. So the fact that you obtain the Portuguese citizenship does not cause the loss of your current citizenship, at least for Portugal. Now, when Lisette was talking about acquiring citizenship by marriage, and we also talked about acquiring citizenship by your grandparents, we talked about the requirement of the knowledge of Portuguese language. So how do you do this? How do you prove your knowledge for the Portuguese language? So the Portuguese language tests are required of people who are applying for the nationality and who cannot otherwise certify their knowledge of Portuguese. For example, if you were in Brazil and you studied in a public school in Brazil, of course that you have knowledge of the Portuguese language. But if you reside in the U.S., then you would have to prove this in another way. So you would have to do a test, which level would be A2 in terms of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. This is a level that is a little bit above the basic Portuguese. You would have to pass the test with a score of 50%. And this way you would make the proof of the requirement that is asked in terms of acquiring citizenship by your grandparents or by marriage. Another thing that we talked about in this case in terms of applying for citizenship by marriage is the proof of an effective connection to the Portuguese community. Now, there is no specific rule or formula for proving an effective connection to the Portuguese community. The courts have provided examples of things that would provide proof and support of an effective connection, and namely the knowledge of the Portuguese language, keeping in your family values of Portuguese traditions and culture. For those who are living abroad, also visiting Portugal regularly also shows some connection to Portuguese community. Active participation in social activities such as Portuguese recreational clubs and associations. And the applicants can also ask for recommendation letters from their Portuguese community association leaders, from friends that have in Portugal. So there are many ways to establish an effective connection to the Portuguese community, and there is no strict rule. So you can do this also by having a tax declaration in Portugal, by having assets in Portugal. So whatever you would have to explain to a lawyer to express your connection will do to establish the effective connection to the Portuguese community. Now, from our experience, there are many questions that are often asked. And so, Lisette, I don't know if you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Marcy. So after we've gone through some of the different scenarios that would entitle someone to Portuguese citizenship, and of course the list was not an exhaustive one, they were the most common scenarios or some of the most common. Let's talk a little bit about the practical, everyday questions that come up quite often. And the first one is, in our opinion, a very big one, right? Why should someone get Portuguese citizenship? So the first reason, and probably one of the most predominant ones, is that a citizen of any country of the European Union, in this case Portugal, is automatically a citizen of the European Union. This means that you can work, you can reside, you can study in Portugal and in any of the other 28 European Union countries without the need for a visa, for example. Quite often, jobs and other professional opportunities are offered first to citizens of the EU. With Portuguese citizenship, you'd also be able to access public medical care and high-quality public education as available to European Union citizens. Let's talk a little bit about education. In terms of education, according to the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment of 2009, the average Portuguese 15-year-old student, when rated in terms of reading literacy, mathematics, and science knowledge, is placed at the exact same level as those students from the United States, from Sweden, from Germany, and from the United Kingdom. Tuition fees, for example, for a university degree in a public university in Portugal, and these statistics are from 2011-2012, which have not changed much, is less than 1,000 euros per year. Talking about healthcare now, for example, the Portuguese healthcare system was ranked number 12 in overall performance by the World Health Organization in a 2000 report ranking the healthcare systems of each of the 190 United Nations member nations. Healthcare centers in Portugal provide general practice, they provide family medicine, public health care, nursing, immunization, and some diagnostic testing. Hospitals have outpatient, inpatient, and emergency services. The beneficiaries only have to pay a small charge for each appointment or treatment, and a regular appointment in a healthcare center or even an emergency appointment in a hospital will cost less than 10 euros. Portugal has recently been pointed as a great place to retire, and that has a lot to do with the cost of living in Portugal, which is very attractive. It is among the lowest in Western Europe, on average 30% lower than in any other country of the region. Retirement income in Portugal, for example, is not taxed. Recent legislation actually allows for resident foreign retirees to receive pension income in the country tax-free. And of course, we have to talk about safety in Portugal. And Portugal is a very safe country as it ranks as the 17th safest country in the world. Other benefits for getting Portuguese citizenship are that you would be able to transfer citizenship to all of your children automatically. As we had seen at the start of our presentation, children of Portuguese citizens are the only ones that have a definite claim for citizenship, and this is transferred automatically to your children. It will also be easier with Portuguese citizenship to complete all purchasing requirements and transactions if you decide to invest and buy property in Portugal. And of course, last but not least, establishing a firm identity with your Portuguese heritage and honoring your Portuguese ancestors. So now that we've seen a little bit about why it is important to get your Portuguese citizenship or some of the benefits, let's talk about a practical everyday scenario, which is another question that we often get. A paternal grandfather who is Portuguese but is now deceased. The father never acquired citizenship, and the question is, am I eligible for citizenship? If the applicant is a grandson or the great-grandson of a Portuguese descendant, the ascendant, this is the grandparent or the great-grandparent, should be the one to request their Portuguese citizenship first. Only after the ascendant is granted citizenship can the applicant request his or her citizenship. If the ascendant, for example, has passed away and the applicant is the grandchild of a Portuguese descendant, it is not possible to acquire citizenship because this grandparent should be the first to acquire it. Since the grandparent is now deceased, he cannot request it, and as a consequence, neither can the father nor his son. So we see here a very practical scenario of the dangers of not acquiring Portuguese citizenship and why it is so important, even if you don't have an interest right now in Portugal or in Europe, to maintain the Portuguese citizenship in the family so as to ensure that future generations are not cut off. Marcy, do you want to continue on with some of our frequently asked questions?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so another question that people ask us has to do with the fact that they filed for Portuguese nationality through marriage, and they receive a notice from the court opposing to their request. And so they ask, what should I do? So in this case, the first thing that they should do when they receive the opposition to their application from the court is to contact a Portuguese attorney to contest the allegations made by the public prosecutor. They should do this because the representation by an attorney in these cases is mandatory. So if you decide to handle this yourself and you do your own allegations without having legal representation, your allegations will not be accepted, and therefore they will not be considered. So in this case, every time that a person applies for application by marriage and receives the opposition from the court, they should enter in contact with a Portuguese lawyer so the Portuguese lawyer can present their allegations and contest the opinion of the public prosecutor. Another question frequently asked has to do with having already at home a birth certificate, and they do not know if they can use this for citizenship purposes when they're filing for their application. Well, in this case, perhaps the birth certificate that you have at home may or may not comply with the legal requirements that are asked in terms of formal documentation from the U.S. So the correct answer is you should enter in contact with an expert and ask which is the correct documentation that you should present so that your application can be successful. Another question is if people will receive a Portuguese passport when they acquire Portuguese citizenship. So in this case, when you are granted Portuguese citizenship, you will not automatically receive a Portuguese passport. What will happen is that your birth will be registered in Portugal, and then with the birth certificate from Portugal, you should go to the local embassy or consulate and ask for your Portuguese passport if you wish, but it is not mandatory. So you will not receive a Portuguese passport with your Portuguese citizenship. This is something that you would have to ask personally and treat personally at the consulate from your residence area. Angela? So, what is the conclusion? If after the presentation you are still not sure if you have a claim for Portuguese nationality, well, then you should do or your own research, ask your consulate, or just consult an expert and explain your specific case. So they may ascertain if you are entitled or not for Portuguese citizenship. Our project is Portugal Reconnect, and we provide complete assistance in processing your Portuguese nationality in Lisbon. We assist also in searching your documents and your ancestors' documents, the birth certificates and the marriage certificates. We translate and we authenticate all your documents required for the process. And we have legal representation in Portugal to submit, execute, and conclude your process for acquiring Portuguese nationality with the relevant government authorities. So if after the presentation you still have any questions about Portuguese citizenship, you can be free to enter in contact with us, and we will be more than happy to assist you, your relatives, or your friends with your Portuguese nationality case.
Excellent. That was a lot of really great information, Lisette and Marcy. Thank you very much. And I know for my own personal case, I fall into the bucket where both my grandmother and mother were born here in the States, and I'll be working with you both to first get my grandmother's citizenship, and then my mother, and then I can get it. And so it's quite a long process.
Your case is one of the cases where, for example, if your grandmother had already died, you would not be able to acquire citizenship.
Right, or I would have to take my chances through marriage, correct?
Yeah, in your case by marriage.
Right, right. So we do have our, so now we are opening up for questions. So everyone on the line, if you have questions, please type them into the console. And we did have our first question early on in the presentation, but we were saving them for the end. It says, and I think you sort of addressed this, but let's just make sure that it's clear. Many of us born here have a parent from Portugal who has long since passed away, but their birth certificates are available. So it sounds like the parent was a citizen, but they have passed away, and now their child would like to get citizenship. How would they go about that?
Okay, so if the parent was Portuguese and has passed away, the child of the Portuguese citizen can acquire the Portuguese citizenship just by declaration of the willing to be Portuguese. So this is the case where we are 100% sure that the person will obtain Portuguese citizenship because it's a direct descendant. And then if that person wants to transmit the citizenship to their children, then they will, after acquiring Portuguese citizenship, it will automatically also transfer to their child, also by expressing the willingness to be Portuguese. So the fact that the parent has deceased is not relevant when it's in direct line. So it's the mother or the father.
Okay, great. Next question is, I was born in Lisbon. Let's just 1 second. I was born in Lisbon, but my parents worked for the American government. My mother had dual citizenship. I could have taken the Portuguese citizenship, but never did. Can I still?
Okay. So in this case, the answer is also the person can also still acquire Portuguese citizenship. The only question is that maybe we should verify if there was not a loss of citizenship when the mother married the father that worked for the American government. Because before '81, there was these cases where you would lose your citizenship. The women would lose their citizenship when they would marry a foreigner. It's not automatic. There are many cases where they didn't lose, but we should first verify if the mother did not lose citizenship. If she did not lose citizenship, then she can acquire also the Portuguese citizenship.
Okay, great. Next question. Can you talk about the process where a spouse gets citizenship through marriage? There was some rule about registering the marriage in Portugal. Also, does the spouse have to pass the Portuguese language requirement?
Okay. Lisette, do you want to answer this one?
Sure. So, so we're talking about a case of acquiring citizenship through marriage. Obviously, one of the spouses is a Portuguese citizen, and the person looking to acquire citizenship has to have been married for more than 3 years. And yes, the first step would be to have the marriage recorded in Portugal, and I know that that was part of the question. You also have to show that you have a good working knowledge of the Portuguese language, and we had already spoken a little bit about how that's done, which is through, you know, a test, and that was actually covered in one of our slides. That is the only way that you can actually prove that you have a that you have knowledge and a good understanding of the Portuguese language. And then we have the other requirement, which is a really big one, and we actually spoke about it in quite some detail, which is the proof of an effective connection to the Portuguese community. And that really is a big one when we talk about citizenship through marriage, because that is the one that is also subject to opposition by the public prosecutor. And we also talked about how there is no one formula or no one rule for how to go about proving this effective connection. We talked about different things like, keeping with traditions and values and the culture of Portugal in your family. If you're living abroad, which obviously is probably the case here, how many times you visit Portugal? Do you have assets in Portugal? Do you have tax filings in Portugal? Are you part of the local Portuguese community, recreational centers, associations, etc.? So those are all things that, to make a good case of an effective connection to the Portuguese community, we would have to keep in mind. And I hope that answered the question of citizenship through marriage.
Yeah, just one note, that there was this reform to the Nationality Act in 2006. And this reform sort of gives a presumption of the connection, the effective connection to the Portuguese communities, to the spouses. However, what happens is that the public prosecutors are not in line with this reform. So they continue to always be presenting opposition to the acquisition of nationality by marriage because they are not following the presumption that exists in the Portuguese Nationality Act. That is, that if you are married to a Portuguese citizen, we presume that you have a legal effective connection to the Portuguese community. So once again, it is also important to contact the attorney so they can contest the opposition, because many times the opposition by the public prosecutor is not in line with what the recent reform from 2006 established, that we presume that a spouse of a Portuguese national has a connection to the Portuguese community.
Okay, and then there was another question about the language exam itself. Is it spoken or written or online? Do you know exactly how it's administered?
So in regard to the exam, this really depends on the area where the person lives. It will be different if the person is a resident of New Jersey, of New York, of Connecticut, California, etc., because the trend is that depending on where the person lives, there will be in partnership with the consulates or indicated by the consulates, there will be some places or some institutions or some schools, some language schools that will administer exams. But again, this is a case-by-case basis, and it really does depend on where the person lives. And the exams are administered. They're written exams, and oftentimes there also will be a spoken part. But again, it depends on how they're administered in different areas of residence.
Okay. We have another question around traveling with dual citizenship, and if you're accused of breaking the law, would you be treated as a Portuguese citizen or a traveling American?
Well, if you would be traveling with a U.S. passport, then you would be treated as a U.S. citizen.
And then if you were traveling on your EU passport, then the opposite.
Then you, yeah. Then you would,
okay.
Yeah.
So I guess it just depends which passport you're traveling on. So
exactly.
So this next question sounds like a case similar to my own. All four of my grandparents were born in Corvo in the Azores. I only have one living avó here in America, but both my parents were born here in America. Am I still eligible to apply, and if so, how do I?
Okay.
Okay.
So in this case, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Marcy. No, go ahead,
Okay.
Marcy. You can go ahead.
Okay. So in this case, it's a very similar case to Angela, and because there is still one grandparent that is alive, our recommendation would be to the parents the child of the grandparents to acquire the citizenship and then transfer the citizenship to the grandchild, because this is a way that you will obtain for 100% sure the Portuguese citizenship. If you would go directly by the grandparents, then you would have to do the language test, you would have to prove the criminal records, so you would have much more requirements than just transferring from the grandparent to the parent and then from the parent to the child or the grandchild. But if this case is not treated and one of the only grandparent that is alive deceased, then there will be no opportunity to acquire Portuguese citizenship, nevermore. So it is a case where the person to have this benefit should treat the Portuguese citizenship right away, or there is a risk that they will never more have the opportunity to obtain Portuguese citizenship.
Okay. Next question. My grandparents, now deceased, were born and married in Portugal and then emigrated here where my father was born and is still alive. My father wishes to get citizenship, which should allow me to get citizenship. Do we just need birth certificates of my grandparents, or do we also need their marriage certificate?
Okay, Lizette, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So, Angela, just to recap, there were a couple of details. The grandparents were born in Portugal, have since been deceased, and the father would like to acquire citizenship, correct?
Correct. And then
okay,
the son. I think the grandson is asking the question, so he's saying his father wants to get citizenship, and then him. So do they
Sure.
just need the birth certificates of the grandparents, or the marriage
So,
certificate?
So again, we're looking at a case of a direct descendant. So the father would be able to get citizenship directly or automatically from the grandparents, even though they are already deceased, assuming that they are in fact Portuguese citizens. He would be able to get it that way and then pass it on to the grandchild.
In the case, we would have to also see where was the marriage of the grandparents celebrated. It was in the U.S. or it was in Portugal. And if the grandparents were married in the U.S., then in this case, it's not only the birth certificate, but also the marriage certificate to record the marriage of the grandparents in Portugal, even if they are deceased, to record the marriage.
Okay,
so it's a case by case. We always have to see if the marriage is recorded or not in Portugal, because the Civil Registry Office tells the history of a family. So it should be always in connection with the truth. So if they were born in Portugal, but they married and that information isn't still in Portugal, then for the history of family, we're going to have the birth, and we're going to have the marriage, then we're going to have the birth of the children, and so on and so on. So the Civil Registry Office tells the story of a family. So if the marriage isn't recorded in Portugal, then besides the birth certificate, it would be also necessary the marriage certificate. And of course, that if there is a divorce, then you can also register the divorce in Portugal, so that there is always a story A married B, and then in 2000, A and B got divorced. In 1995, they had, a kid that was C. So the Civil Registry Office, tells the story of a family.
Okay, next question. How do I get a birth certificate from Portugal to prove my parents' or grandparents' citizenship?
You want to go ahead with that?
Sure. So in order to get a birth certificate from Portugal, and since we have our Office of Representation in Portugal, we obviously internally handle all of that because we have direct access to the civil registry offices. So that's how we do it internally. As far as anyone else, I believe that there is There are a couple of ways that people go about it. Because they are public records, you can have somebody in Portugal go to the civil registry office and request a birth certificate in person. You have some online, an online government service. And Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong, is it Portugal Cidadão?
Yeah.
Okay, so Portugal Cidadão, you can, create an account and be able to get some information that way. I am under the understanding that there are some consulates that also would be able to provide public records, but I know that not all of them do, so you definitely would have to check with the consulate in your area of residence.
Okay. And also, I'll just throw in my own personal experience there because I am so far removed in terms of lineage. And my great-grandmother was the last person born in Portugal, and she was born before 1900. I actually did go to Portugal, but I would have to go to the special archive. Yeah. So in my case, it would take quite an effort to go there personally.
Right.
Yeah.
And Angela, when we talk about birth certificates, and obviously most of our attendees, I'm assuming, are based in the United States, so I'm sure that everyone can relate to this. When our ancestors immigrated, our parents or our grandparents, we find that a lot of people dropped a lot of their names. I mean, it's not uncommon to have someone in Portugal with 5 names or 6 names, whereas, someone by the name of João in Portugal became John, or someone by the name of Conceição became Connie, or someone by the name of, José became Joe. So if we don't have all of that information, and if there isn't someone who can actually, go through a very in-depth search, especially when we talk about, like in your case, records that date so far back, it often becomes very complicated to retrieve those records. Because there are so many changes in names when people, left Portugal to come to the United States. So we've seen with a lot of our clients and just, just in the general community, that it is sometimes a very difficult task to get a hold of these records because, the names don't align or, names are missing or, everybody knows someone by Joey, but his name was actually José. So,
or they drop, they drop some. The name has, when a person does a search, so if the person goes to the Portugal Cidadão or goes to the consulate and asks for a birth certificate, and they think that the father's name was João Pereira Santos, and none of them is, the person that they're looking for, because maybe he was João Manuel Pereira Santos. So in these cases, it's the better advice is to have somebody in Portugal that is doing this extensive research, because by going to the Portugal Cidadão or to the consulate and just giving, this name that is not, 100% correct in terms of registration of birth in Portugal, they will not have the results. So this is sometimes difficulties that are encountered and that need the research because the names have to be exactly the same.
Yes, it can get very complicated and time-consuming, which is why you folks have started this service. And we do have a question here about if someone wanted to use your service, what are the costs involved?
Okay, so in the beginning of the presentation, and Angela, we kind of skipped over it, but just as a side note, we are providing for all the attendees that are here live with us and are interested in getting citizenship but aren't sure if they're eligible or they have their own story to tell, so to say. We are providing a free assessment. You just visit our website at www.portugalreconnect.com. We're here really to talk about citizenship. Not so much our services. So this, our pricing or the services falls a little bit outside of the scope of, our conversation today. But nonetheless, it is a case-by-case basis. It depends on what the actual situation is. If we're talking about citizenship through marriage, a child of a Portuguese citizen, are we talking about, citizenship as a grandchild, et cetera. They're all different scenarios with different with different requirements that obviously would have to be assessed, on a case-by-case basis. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We'll be more than happy to, conduct not only the free assessment, but also obviously give you all of our services and fees and what we will do to help you get your citizenship.
Right, and I know that for myself it was worth it just because of the extensive research and documentation procurement that's involved. So I'm very much looking forward to working with you both on getting citizenship for the three generations.
One of the things that we know, and that's why we believe so much in this project, is that people get really frustrated and scared with the process of obtaining Portuguese citizenship. So what we try to do is to offer a hassle-free experience where there is no frustration and no stress about getting the Portuguese citizenship, and we conduct the process so the person really doesn't have a lot of concerns in terms of obtaining birth certificates in the U.S., in terms of obtaining birth certificates of the ancestors in Portugal. So we try to provide the most hassle-free experience that this process involves.
Right. Well, thank you very much. That actually concludes our questions for today, which were quite a few and many good questions. If I can, oops, my own slides are not working. There we go. So for everybody on the webinar, please know that this webinar will be archived online on YouTube, on our website, and we also will provide PDFs of the presentation, so you can always download them and print them out if you'd like, and it's definitely a resource to share with family and friends. So please, forward them the recording, forward them the PDF, and definitely, look to us to provide this kind of information for the community on a number of different topics. And so with that, we will go ahead and conclude today's presentation. Thank you very much, Lizette and Marcy, for your time. Thank you, everybody on the line, for attending. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and until next time, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.